The meeting is live, Chairman.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to today's licensing committee. I'm Councillor James Cole, Chairman of this committee. I'm supported today by the Vice Chairman of the committee, Councillor Bob Barnett, and the other members of the committee who are here at present, Councillor Bridgman, Councillor Drummond, Councillor Piper Hooker, and Linda and Greg Pass. On Zoom at present, Councillor Beck and Councillor Marsh joined this meeting remotely. Should there be a vote, they would not be able to vote, but they are welcome to take part. I'm hoping that the portfolio holder with responsibility for licensing, Councillor Marino, will also be in attendance at due course. This is Julia Bryan, this is Amanda Ward, Vicky Rigdon, and this is Maura Fraser, the officers who will be advising the meeting. Mr. Ben Ryan is in attendance as the clerk committee to my left. The Zoom host is Mr. Stephen Chard. Meeting is being recorded, live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Please allow everyone present in this meeting area, make sure when speaking to be loud and clear, that those at home can hear you. I also ask you to make sure you put your mobile phones to silent and to turn off the sound on your phones. You do seem to want to repeat yourself. If we have the evacuation alarm this afternoon, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed by the emergency exit route, which will be shown to us from trained officers. Please follow any instructions given by trained officers. Assembly point is the Newbury Station multi-storey car park. Anyone requiring help will be assisted accordingly by our trained officers. Members, any questions? Great. Apologies. Item 1. Have apologies from Councillor Steve Walter and Councillor Martin Pickles. Do we know of any others? One. Right. I haven't heard from them. Okay, your question is later. In which case, the minutes. Do we have any comments on the minutes? Comments?
Very reasonable, Chairman. I so propose.
Excellent. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, Chairman.
All in favour? Sign the close. One. Members, does anybody have anything to declare? Declarations. Okay. Which case, item 4. Moira.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members. In terms of the update from the taxi liaison meeting, we had a really productive and well-attended meeting which took place on the 9th of January. Main discussion items at this meeting were the 2023-24 fees and the tariffs for 2024, both of which are the subject of separate papers on this agenda later on in the meeting. In terms of the tariffs, the trade proposed at the meeting that going forward we align tariff setting to the financial year to assist them in their financial planning. And so therefore from later on this year, we will hold the initial discussion with them at the October meeting instead of January. One of the other suggestions, obviously, that we'll come on to later at the meeting is that the tariffs be linked to the CPI index, but we can have more of a discussion on it when we get to that item. There's nothing more to say really about this item, and members are asked to note the report. Happy to take it.
Do we have any comments or questions?
Yeah, it's really applies to both this item, the meeting and the conversation we had at the meeting, and the next item, which is the item 6, which is the tariffs, because it particularly relates to two things. Firstly, under the taxi policy, the question of penalty points for various things that are in that policy that are levied upon drivers and might affect their ability to renew. And you'll recall the discussion we had about the tariff in relation to soiling charges. And the fact that the intention is that the amount that's put in the table is a maximum. And therefore I raised the question as to what if the driver says, I'm going to levy a charge of whatever it might be, and the passenger says, well, that's not fair, that doesn't reflect the damage that's been caused. How you resolve, because it's not an amount, it's not, there is a soiling charge of X and it's applied regardless as to whether it's a small amount or a massive issue. Chairman, clearly in my role in relation to the, as we're reflecting on the Constitution, there then comes the question of where does Berkshire Council sit in this debate, holding the coats, as it were. And I had a conversation with Sean Murphy about that, and there was a conversation: does this sit naturally within the appeals panel of the council, or is it a licensing subcommittee? And both actually have a reasonable argument. It's more sort of civil, so it's more sort of the appeals panel argument, but it's licensing, it's definitely taxes, so it's more licensing subcommittee. Now, actually, at the end of the day, as long as whoever it is has been trained on that particular, because we've been trained on Gambling Act and Licensing Act, licensing subcommittee. Appeals panel have been trained in relation to homeschool transport and council tax in particular. I mean, there was something about leisure science, but I've never heard of one of those coming to panel. So there's a different skill sets, and of course there is some overlap. There are. I am certainly a member of COE. So I think it's a matter at the end of the day for council to decide. But I think if we can steer council and give council some guidance as to what we think, and maybe what the appeals panel thinks about all of this, it would be helpful. My personal view, it's licensing stuff makes more sense. It's a licensing issue. It's to do with taxes, and licensing subcommittee, we have the skill to listen to an appeal. But we might, because it's not statutory, unlike the Gambling Act and the Licensing Act subcommittee hearings, it's possible that we might actually adopt the processes that we use in the appeals panel. So, for example, that would affect the quorum. That would mean that we, well, it would affect the number of members and the ability of the number of members in the room. Because if you remember, licensing panel is 3 members, and you can only have 3 members making the decision. Appeals panel is 4, which gives you more flexibility because the quorum is 3. But with 4 members, it allows you some flexibility as to who's there. So I think that's something we just need to give a steer to us. So
We could always have a licensing appeals panel on board. So we're
indeed, that's very much where I'm sort of coming from.
that would make sense.
Chairman, I think Cran's made some very valid points, but I thought we were actually perhaps going to discuss it when we got to item 6. But having said that, if you are
I wonder where he was going.
if you're happy, there's a couple other points I was going to make at this time. If you're happy, Chairman, or I'll wait till 6.
We wouldn't want to do it twice. So
Okay, all right. Well, I mean, you know, I have some little concern about this issue because you're right. You talk about a maximum amount, and where's this criteria? What is a small soiling and a major soiling? Also, so I mean, there could be a dispute at that point, and regarding how does the taxi actually try and recuperate monies at that time, and it probably won't be. And can they come back on the individual? Will they be able to identify the individual? So there's several issues. Also, in regarding what you were saying, Graham, if whatever panel investigates it, if it gets to that point, how does one investigate it? It can be quite use a word, a messy situation. Does one get involved in photographs? You know, do you actually investigate? How deep do you start investigating? So, you know, I have a little concern. I hope we don't actually go down that route, but we might have to. That's all I was, you know.
But the note I made was to ask whether officers had a view on this. Item 6. Councillor.
Well, since we're doing it now,
I apologise, Chairman, if I brought this up to you.
well, let's, with your
Let's
forbearance, let's finish it now, and we can just say we agreed it 10 minutes ago when it gets to item 6. I follow the argument wholeheartedly. I think it should be a sub. If we can choose 4, let's do it as a subcommittee of this panel. Our duty of care is double, isn't it? We have a duty of care for taxi drivers, we have a duty of care for the population using the taxis. There's got to be a level of trust. I'm sure that certain individuals will argue it one way or the other, in which case, I think Councillor Barnett's point, yeah, we probably will be resorting to photographs and other evidence, because to put it bluntly, by the time it gets to us, the taxi will have been cleaned out several times, won't it? And it's in the past. So I'm struggling to find a definitive way out of that. I think, however, it should be down to us rather than any other body. I think, and I agree with the maximum sorting charge going up to 200. I agree with that, but as you rightly say, Councillor Bridgman, it's a maximum, and there's got to be a degree of fairness all round from the drivers, from the trade, and from the public as well. So if you can square that circle, Councillor Bridgman, I'd be grateful, and I will support it.
I'm happy to bring them in, or I can ask officers.
Well, Chairman, if I may just add one, just thinking about the sort of something I think that we do need to, we will need officers' advice on. So far as the fees aspect, sorry, as far as the licensing policy aspect, the reason I brought it up now is because the licensing policy aspect isn't tariffs. The licensing policy and the question as to what penalty points one might have.
Councillor, could I ask you to get on about it? Have we just lost the?
There we go.
Screen is really happening.
I'm blaming the technology, Chairman. Sorry about that.
Please continue.
The licensing policy aspect is clearly a matter, as it is with homeschool transport and other things, where it is a decision of the council. We've got a table and we say that applies, and it's an appeal against, generally speaking, an officer's decision to apply a table in a particular way, as it is with homeschool transport, appeal against officer's decision to deny homeschool. I would like, and I'm not saying we need it tonight, but I would like officers to go away and think about the role of the council, if there is one, in relation to sorting charges, because this becomes a civil question between the passenger and the driver, or the driver or the firm. What ability does the council have to step in? And if the council actually doesn't have an ability to step in and adjudicate, who does? How do you square how do you square that circle between a tariff ranging from 0 to 200 and the levy?
Because this is not a tariff.
Exactly. Well, a range of potential charges for a particular thing happening.
Kevin, before we go, can I just add one thing? If this committee is considering a panel, would we need to change our constitution to insert that?
Yes.
I think you would need to change because if you recall, when we looked at the constitution, there is now an appendix relating to the licensing subcommittee.
Yeah.
We would need to tweak that to allow the license to permit the licensing subcommittee to hear another flavour of appeal.
So there's another process we need
But
to go through.
this is what I'm saying. because this is how I brought up the debate between this committee and the appeals panel, and the appeals, because it's at the moment appeals panel, it will become the appeals committee under the new constitution. It's for council to decide ultimately where these things should go, but I think guidance from us wouldn't go amiss in the slightest.
So could I put this to officers for comment, please?
I mean, as Councillor Bridgman states, you could probably make an argument both ways to whichever one you would ultimately, I think that decision would sit with council when you take through the constitutional changes and the scheme of delegation. As a matter of personal preference, I would think that if members of the licensing committee are really familiar with the licensing policy, it may be easier for them to make those determinations. But in the same vein, the members of the appeals panel are trained on the various aspects. So I don't think we would have a strong view one way or the other. In terms of, and my licensing colleagues may know more about this, but in terms of the fouling charge, my understanding is that it would be a matter between the customer and the taxi or the taxi company, and not necessarily that the council would become involved in those charges. But I stand to be corrected by my colleagues.
So should the council get involved? Then is a question. Can we have a comment on that?
Sorry, Chairman, I didn't actually catch what you said on the last bit, but I'd agree with everyone's views. It's largely a civil matter. I was going down Councillor Bridgman's thought process of, something we could put into the new policy, and it would sort of have some similarities towards the penalty point scheme. As Councillor Bridgman rightly says, that's officer decisions that then they're being appealed against. I do think having some kind of perhaps criteria or examples of X may mean so much or so much of a fouling charge. It would be useful, I think, to look at what other authorities do and perhaps see if we could get some steer on that, and also possibly from our legal colleagues.
Can we ask you therefore to do that? Take a look at what others do for this.
Certainly, yes.
Can you please take a look at what we are actually entitled to do as a council on a civil matter like this?
Yes, Chairman, we can do that.
Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, if I may, on the subject, I absolutely agree on the charge, the soil charge. That's exactly what we need to do. Comparisons, how others deal with it. Not, I suggest, London, because London have a very different scheme and they have different capability of being vehicles. But on the subject of the policy, of course, we've adopted the policy. We have a policy. We have. I look to officers for guidance, but I don't think we've had any appeals as yet. But no doubt they could be happen tomorrow. So I do think we need to think about a system for dealing with those, not the soiling charges, but how we wish to deal with any appeals that may be made against particular points being applied by officers.
Comments, officers?
We are still in the process, oh sorry, the camera's off, of finalising the policy. So we can, obviously we'll look to put something in there about that.
Okay, so you will include that when you
We can look to include that, yeah, in the revisions.
Right.
I think during the discussions there was talk of it going to the appeals committee rather than to a licensing subcommittee. But as I say, that would be a matter for full council to determine.
You're absolutely right. The previous thinking was to move it towards the appeals committee. I like, personally, what little it's worth, I like the fact that the members of this committee should have been trained on the applicable law. So do I. I agree.
And how many proposals sitting on the council for
My personal proposal is if you remember going back, we attempted to make the licensing subcommittee four, to have a quorum of three, but membership of four. So if one didn't turn up, we were quorum.
Yes.
And we got hammered at the licensing act. We had one particular hearing where we had to go back and rehear it because we were a panel of four, not a panel of three under the licensing act. So I think I would prefer, we'll look to officers for guidance, but I think I would prefer to follow the appeals panel structure of four with a quorum of three.
Well, I'm sure that will come out.
Yeah.
Excellent. And can we go back to item 4? See what I think we were on.
Oh, noted, Chairman.
Yes, it is noted.
If we have no other comments on item 4, we will simply note this item. Excellent. In which case, we move on to item 5.
Thank you, Chairman. The 2023-24 fees were discussed at the 7th of November Licensing Committee meeting, where members agreed to undertake a statutory 28-day consultation on the private hire operator and hackney carriage and private hire vehicle license fees. Those are the only ones that we were required to undertake a consultation on. The consultation ran from the 17th of November to the 15th of December. We placed a notice in the Newbury Weekly News and the Reading Chronicle. We put a notice up at the West Berkshire Council offices. We put something on the PPP website and on the West Berkshire Council consultation portal. The consultation was also sent to the 1,142 members of the community panel and to those people who've expressed an interest in roads, transport and parking. And also we wrote to the members of the trade, or specifically to the proprietors as well, with the propositions. We had 4 responses to the consultation. 2 were from residents and 2 were from parish councillors who also happened to be members of the community panel. One of them commented that the higher fees could be leading to higher tariffs and therefore fewer customers for the trade. We did discuss that point with the trade at the liaison meeting, and they said that that wasn't really their understanding or their the view of how things were running at the moment, and that there were not that many vehicles sitting around on the ranks at any one time. Those tended to be vehicles from that were run by sole proprietors, not by the bigger taxi companies. The final response raised some concerns about the content of the knowledge test, and that is something that we can look at when we look at the knowledge test at the July meeting of this committee meeting. And they were also supported the remittance for the electric and hybrid vehicles. The other 2 respondents supported the proposed changes to the fees. There is a comment also from one of the people about taxi companies being run from outside of the country. Just to say that we looked into that particular allegation, and it related to a company that was licensed by another authority, not by West Berkshire. And we're not aware of any incidents of that happening within West Berkshire. As no objections were received, the fees will be included in the budget paperwork and will be going through the cycle and will come into effect as of the 1st of April. Happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Maura. Do we have any questions?
Their summary of what transpired, and it's very nice. I mean, compared to some of the consultations we had to have 4 responses to what is after all a very important consultation. Is I think it shows that officers are getting it right, getting what's proposed out. This is particular trade, as opposed to coming back on particular items. So that the way in which it's being handled, the way in which it's being received, I think it bodes well.
Yeah. I'd like to
Excellent. Well, we're not asked to vote on this, we're asked to note it. We'll note it with thanks. Okay. Moira, next one, please.
Chairman, in terms of the tariffs, we've already had a discussion around governance and how that will be taken forward. And we've agreed a way that we will go back and look at how other people are dealing with the filing charges, and also have a conversation with our colleagues in the legal team. In line with the agreed procedures, an initial discussion with the trade about tariffs took place at the January meeting. We will obviously look to be moving to that to October from the 2024 cycle. The trade presidents at the meeting proposed that they would like to see an increase linked to the CPI, which was running at about 10.7% in November of last year. The trade also stated that they would like to see an uplift in the filing charges, which were currently set at £75 for interior filing and £25 for exterior filing. And we'd welcome further feedback from members around those proposals. They also asked that members consider amending the wording relating to the applicability of tariffs to take into consideration journeys that spanned more than one tariff. So specifically looking at the wording hiring when journey commenced between. The trade stated that they would like to mandate the use of credit cards, and this was something that we would have to include in the policy. And they would also like to see the introduction of time and dated calendar meters, which would prevent our residents being ripped off, in essence, by unscrupulous taxi drivers. As is always the case, as Councillor Pask mentioned a little while ago, members will need to balance the legitimate aims of the taxi trade to maintain profitability in the face of increasing costs that they're experiencing, but still protect the public from excessive fares. So it's always a difficult balance that we appreciate that members need to trod. The trade have been asked to submit a business case or a formal request for these changes to be implemented, and that's still outstanding. We haven't had one as yet following the liaison meeting, but I'm sure it will be arriving with us shortly. We will continue, as we have in previous years, to undertake an informal consultation with the wider trade to make sure that we're getting the views of more than just the people that attend the liaison group meetings. A proposed timetable is set out in paragraph 414, albeit that we may need to push back the informal consultation by a week, but that's not likely to hold up the process in any way. We welcome the views of members on the proposals, methodology and timescales set out in the report.
Thank you, Moira. And just to confirm then, you do not propose to start this off unless there is a formal proposal from the trade.
That will be for members to determine, but it was suggested at the trade meeting in January last year, and again at the trade meeting in January of this year. So happy to be guided by members on that one.
Okay, thank you. I'll take Councillor Beck on screen and then Councillor Lee. Or on mute, Councillor Beck.
Right. It was just mentioned about credit cards. Are you talking about credit cards for use by the trade to pay West Berkshire, or are you talking about the customers using the cards to pay the trade? The other thing is you mentioned credit cards and also debit cards. Could you just clarify those two matters, please?
Chairman, I would take, credit card and debit cards to mean the same thing in this instance. I know that they're not, but the ability to take a card transaction within the vehicle. So not with West Berkshire Council, but the transaction between the customer and the taxi.
But all taxis would have to be able to take card transactions.
Thank you.
My understanding is that sometimes it's used as an excuse not to take certain fares. People say that they don't have access to credit card facilities.
Councillor Lee.
Yes, Chairman. Having gone on a tube strike when I went to London, to the last tube strike last year, they do use credit and debit cards at taxis. I know one taxi accused me doing so. Maybe because they want to just punch a transaction. I don't know. I'm not going to say any more about that, but I think it's quite reasonable if there is a consideration to allow people to use credit and debit cards. A lot of people do use it, that option, and if people still want to use cash, that's up to them. But I just think it is a modern way of doing things. Obviously, there will need to have a reasonable reception, which could be a problem in some parts of our district. In terms of consultation,
Yeah, it's a good idea. But if there isn't any radical changes, then we might be able to reduce the consultation time, because I'm concerned on 2 points. One, we could overconsult. And two, the delays on the implementations of the new tariffs. Because obviously there's also going to be tariffs sorted out for 2024. And certainly within problems with inflation at the moment and costs. Delaying things can be a problem. So those are just my points.
Thank you. Mr. Parsons.
Well, just briefly, Chairman, I do support the principle of having a card machine or a taxi, as long as it isn't to the exclusion of cash, which some people still get very much abused.
I can certainly go along with that.
More than covered a lot there, and it's a while since we had the taxi liaison meeting. With regard to the increase in the tariffs, there was some discussion. Am I right to say that the tariffs will only apply over after the preset meter reading of when one got in the taxi? Was that covered in Moira's, it was rather quick, whether that was covered in Moira's presentation?
If I may, I will certainly pick up Councillor Littler's question. Okay, bear with me. We're asked to do three things. I'm going to run, as it were, A, C, B. So A is note the existing tariffs. Well, noted because we set them. So you know that. Or executive set them on our recommendation. 2.3 comment, note that the comments on the proposed methodology and timescales for considering any modifications. Now, here I certainly sympathise with the point that was made by the taxi trade that they would like to see tariffs come in at the start of the financial year, because that ties up with most of their accounting years for their businesses. So and we make the point, and officers make the point, that in order to achieve that, you've got to start there is a consultation process, there's a whole process we go through to get to that point. So I certainly welcome the idea that we would start in October and work our way through, with the intention that any new tariff comes before executive in time for introduction and comms. I'll come back to that in a moment. To introduce from the 1st of April, guessing really, for most of what we would want to achieve. Now, we can't do that this time around, and indeed I certainly agree that where we left it in the liaison meeting was we were waiting for a proposal from the trade to consider and take forward, if we so chose, through the process. Now, I say two things about that. Number one, we can't do that until the trade come forward. Therefore, we are in their hands for other then as to that cycle, as to the introduction of any new set of tariffs within this year. And secondly, there will need to be some serious comms around that, because we only recently had a change in tariffs. We anticipated when we brought that change in that we might need to revisit it because of inflation, particularly because of fuel inflation. We know what has happened there. So I simply say that we need to make sure that we get the comms right between us and the trade when any set of tariffs comes through executive.
The general public.
Well, in order to make sure that the general public understand what is going on and why these things are being done, and in particular in relation to, for example, the fouling charge increase.
You would be thinking about an interim increase, therefore, after June and July, that sort of time.
Yes, indeed. But as I say, we are in the hands of the trade in order to bring that forward. Now, if I deal with the proposals that the trade made in our meeting and just comment on, this is from 4.7 of the report forward. There was a reckoning on the consumer price index tracking at around 10.7%. Proposal that the initial flag rate wouldn't be changed, and that's the point that Councillor Hooker makes, that you get into the cab and immediately you are with a charge of a £5 or whatever it might be, but that takes you a certain distance or allows you to sit in the cab for a certain length of time until it starts clocking. But to keep that flag rate the same, because people are used to it, and effectively the change in the tariff would all be, we would keep the same increments. I think it's 20p increments, And we keep those increments on tariff 1 at least. And we keep those increments, but we change the distance you've got for your increment, as it were. We've discussed plowing charges, and I just simply say that we need to work out what we do when there's a disagreement. Applicability of tariff times. The trader asking for an amendment to the wording of the table, hiring when Germany commences between, and look at the journeys between certain times. And I understand that if a journey starts at half an hour before tariff, the first bit of the tariff finishes, but carries on for another half hour, an hour into tariff 2, as it were, it is unfair on the driver that they can't charge, let's say it's an hour and a half journey, they can't charge the first half hour, the first third, tariff 1, and the other 2/3 in tariff 2. I certainly agree that we need to visit that and make sure that our tariff table reflects that the tariff might increase or decrease during the journey because it clocks over a certain breakdown. Calendar and controlled meters. Well, they made comments about time calendar and time controlled meters. I thought I understood what they were talking about, and I absolutely agree. If the meters are capable of being calendar controlled, we should mandate that within the policy or wherever we do it. Yeah. And finally, on credit cards, absolutely, I agree with them that our policy, this would be a policy issue, should mandate that taxis should have the capacity to take credit cards if the customer wishes to pay by credit or debit card. Now, I take on board 2 points. Firstly, we shouldn't ignore cash. The customer should still be able to pay by cash if it's proper legal tender and with the right amount. And remember, there is a table as to how many pennies you can pay for something in. But more to the point, we should also reflect that we do have a district which does have some interesting transmission spots, and therefore it might be that we have a driver who is perfectly prepared to take a payment by credit card with a customer who is perfectly and wishes to pay by credit card, but the transaction has an issue because of where they're sitting.
I'm familiar with this.
I think we should just reflect on that when whatever we do, whatever we mandate. But I'm very happy with where we're going to with this. I think the steer I would give officers is that I would agree essentially with what was being proposed once the trade come forward with those tariff proposals. Thank you.
Okay. But just something to consider again on the comms is somehow we or the trade needs to advise, I think, the passenger when he's getting in, certainly on this 5-10 minutes before they get in, that there's a change in tariff, that it's going to be an increase or a decrease. When he gets in, it's going to cost so much, when he finally gets out, it's more, of course, this new business of charging at the new tariff rate will apply because you've got into the next tariff.
It would need to be made clear, absolutely.
Sure. And the other point on credit cards, of course, there is a lot of organisations that don't take every credit card. So that means that needs to be considered as well.
Yeah.
So would we be mandating specific credit cards?
No.
I think you'd probably be mandating Visa and MasterCard, wouldn't you?
A lot of places exclude Diners Club and the American Express. Yeah. So everyone, a lot of people do that, but they should do the same.
Okay. Councillor Marsh, you've been quiet.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think it's been said, but all I would add is that it's quite unusual to find people that take cash these days, because one gets used to everywhere you go, they're taking debit cards, and it would be odd if, in a way, if our cabs didn't have this facility. So I think it's quite important that they do, because a lot of people simply are not carrying cash. They're just being used to paying for everything by card, and this was particularly since the pandemic, when, of course, for safeguarding reasons, people were encouraged to pay by card and not carry cash. So it's happened everywhere, really, and I think that we need to recognise that and offer our drivers, our firms, customers that facility. Thank you for inviting me to comment, Chair, because it's not always been easy to hear what's being said, but by turning the volume up very loud, I can hear wise words emanating from the in the chamber. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment too, that you're having difficulty hearing us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to talk up. Okay. If we have nothing more, we'll leave that one there. We note. Yeah.
And I think officers have got the right steer from us on the bits they wanted to steer on. But I look to officers as to whether they think they've heard enough to give them guidance.
Are you happy, officers?
We have, Chairman, and so we'll await the proposal from the trade, and then perhaps undertake the informal consultation, which will allow us to still come back to the special meeting that we're proposing to hold in March, and let members know where we've got to with that. Obviously, if we haven't had a proposal from the trade, then we wouldn't be going ahead with anything. But I suspect something will arrive soon.
Okay. In which case, on we go. Item 7.
The final substantive item on the agenda tonight is the update to the Section 1.8 guidance. The Home Office issued revised guidance on the 20th of December, just before Christmas last year. Licensing authorities are required to consider the guidance in relation to the carrying out of their functions under the 2003 Licensing Act. The previous guidance was issued, members will recall, in April of 2018. To depart from the guidance could give rise to an appeal or judicial review, and therefore any reasons for departures needs to be clearly given when decisions are made by the licensing authority, whether that be members or officers. It is also a key document which applicants and licensing lawyers will refer to, along with a statement of licensing policy before drafting and submitting any applications to the council. It will also be referred to in licensing hearings before licensing subcommittees and also in appeals before the magistrates' courts. The key changes to the document are set out in paragraphs 4.4 to 4.13 of the report. If members have any specific queries, it may be that we aren't able to answer them here in the meeting today. We may need to refer them to our colleagues in the legal team. But we just wanted to draw your attention to the document in the first instance, and secondly to some of the changes that have been made to that guidance.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, massive time. Sure, members have read it. Yes, good.
It says we don't need to.
But I'm not, Chairman.
Ah,
Chairman, I have 3 comments.
good.
One, I think that officers have relied to some extent on what the Licensing Association, the guidance that come out from licensing. And I'm afraid I think the licensing, in one particular instance, the Licensing Association guidance is wrong.
Go for it.
And so if I take you to 4.5 of your pack, this is the second change anticipated. Persons operating an alcohol delivery service is now suggested that they may consider contacting their licensing authority for its view on whether this form of alcohol sales is permitted, where previously should contact the licensing authority. Well, that's not actually what the guidance says. If you look at 3.10 of the guidance, certainly the word may has changed, the word should has changed to may in paragraph 310, but it's only in relation to premises with an existing alcohol license, not new entrants to the field. First sentence of 310, the paragraph 310 is unchanged. So persons who run premises providing alcohol delivery services should, this is the new guidance. There we go, I'll make sure I'm there. Should notify the relevant licensing authority that they are operating such a service in the operating schedule. In other words, when they apply for a license, they have to tell us that that's what they're going to be doing. And I think that's rather important, because we've had discussions about alcohol and exactly how they check that someone on the doorstep they're delivering to is at least 18 when they deliver the alcohol over. So I think that that is quite right, that that's unchanged. Now, it goes on to say premises with an existing license who choose to operate such a service, so an extension to their current service, may consider contacting the licensing authority. There's a change, but it's not a change to everyone who applies one of these types of license. I've got two more, but
Shall we continue on this one?
Yes, Jim. So, yeah, I didn't realise that because that affects people like Amazon, who are delivering it, Deliveroo, and other sort of organisations. And they wouldn't have a clue, and the drivers they employ or cyclists or whoever, most probably wouldn't have a clue either, and they would need to have the under 25 training for a start.
well, if a new Amazon came, I mean, Amazon and Deliveroo and whatever will already have, presume if they are selling and delivering alcohol, will already have that license, which I hope they've already got.
Yeah,
the
the
license
license
to
could be delivering from
Hello,
some from a store
could
or
you
whatever.
draw
That is, you know, that is something that, you know, that is a question for the licensing authority as to whether or not offences being committed, because they're not doing that. We require, I think, we have required as conditions to such a license that they have a way of checking that the person they're delivering to is at least 18.
But also, the government's also got a responsibility with notifying these organisations in England and Wales.
Well, the law's the law, and this is the guidance. So I simply say that I think that the interpretation of this paragraph is slightly incorrect, and it emanates from the association, not from officers who've relied on what the association said in their guidance. That's the first one, Chair.
We'll ask for officers to comment in a moment.
The last one was an iPad because I've been asked for handed over for evidence of
The reg.
yeah.
So have I, Chairman, or my wife.
I'm saying it is-
And
They're being trained. Good.
Sainsbury's, so far as we're concerned, make sure that we're of an age.
Officer, would you like to comment on this one, please?
Chairman, I think, well, I don't, Councillor Bridgman has hit the nail on the head. There's a difference between existing and new applications. So apologies if we've misled you on that one. And my understanding is that most of the organisations do have procedures in place for checking. So they will have the individual organisations, as you've already stated, do have procedures in place for checking on delivery.
Okay. Councillor Bridgman, would you like to continue?
Yes, if I can, because I know what there's one which was quite interesting, and it's the link. This is a 4.12, change 9. This is the linkage between licensing and planning. And if you look at it, refers to paragraph 14.66 of the guidance, which, if you'll bear with me, I'm now rapidly jumping through to find. Yeah. So what this paragraph says, and this is the new guidance, where there's an application for planning permission, we have had that question of cart and horse. Do you apply for planning permission for the building and then discover you can't use a new pub, for example, and then discover the licensing authority won't get, you know, you built this new building and you can't get the license to run it? Or do you apply for a license in anticipation that if you get the license, you will now build the building and run it as a pub? Probably that way round, because it's cheaper to apply for the license than it is to discover later that you built this building. You can't actually use it for what you wanted to use it for. And I remember the case of Calco, where we had that exact debate. And this seeks to put a linkage, more of a linkage. So the NPP, the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, who all of us on planning committees know very well, expects new development can be integrated effectively with existing businesses and community facilities. Now, this is the bit I'd like some officer comment on. Existing businesses and facilities should not have unreasonable restrictions placed on them as a result of development permitted after they were established. And I was trying to work out how a new development would somehow impose a restriction on an existing business. And I'm having some difficulty with that. Where the operation, I look to you, Chairman, in a moment. Where the operation of an existing business or community facility could have a significant adverse effect on new development, including change of use in its vicinity, the applicant or agent of change, as a new phrase, should be required by the local planning authority to provide suitable mitigation before the development is being completed. So this new development comes in, affects exists. So I suppose I can understand you build a supermarket well, you build a supermarket that sells alcohol, and you affect the corner shop that was selling alcohol beforehand, and so on and so forth. So exactly how are we expected as a planning authority to somehow require that mitigation against existing businesses? And this is very much another licensing field.
If you have a very noisy country pub and you build a housing estate around it, there may be objections to the noise. The pub was there first. Is this one of the effects?
Well,
members will recall we had that review, which had very similar circumstances last year. I can't recall the property as up in Thatcham on Crookham Common, where there was an
Yes.
Yeah.
So there are practical examples of when that may arise.
But can I ask a question, Chairman? Councillor Bridgman, I understand the argument. What can we do about it? I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused.
No, I'm just anticipating an issue for planning.
Yeah.
Rather than an issue for licensing. But it's interesting that it comes out of this.
Yes.
I simply voice it.
Okay.
Not to say that we can do anything about it. I mean, the guidance is the guidance is the guidance. How do we
Officers are bringing this to our attention.
Okay.
But there are changes that may affect the way members have to review decisions of subcommittees.
Well, in that case, I would suggest that this is also brought to the attention of the planning department.
Agreed. The same about it.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand. I believe that the planning authority are one of the consultees, statutory consultees on licensing applications in any event. So there would be that tie.
Okay.
Yes, you're right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay.
And my final one is one I will simply mention, but I won't take your time up with it. There's one bit of this document where the Home Office don't understand how to structure documents. They've got 4 elements to a particular thing, but they've only listed 3 of them because they put 2 of them next to each other. So I just ask officers to take that one back. They want to say point out it. You know, when you issue a revision of this, maybe you just get that one right. We don't need to worry about it.
There was one other that I was commenting on, which is 410. What's the definition of a substantial change? And we'll leave that one with officers to come up with an answer to, perhaps.
Thank you, Chairman.
Each case would obviously be assessed on its own merits, and we would seek legal advice on individual applications where necessary.
Good answer. Do we have any other comments from officers? No? Okay. It certainly does matter, this document, as far as subcommittee decisions are concerned. Right. In that case,
It's the NPPF of the licensing world.
yes, it is. In that case, again, we note if I have no other comments. And the last item is the forward plan. Yeah. Any comments on the forward plan? No? No. Oh, yes. There is a special meeting coming up. What, March? 23rd.
It's 20
Sorry,
according to the
20.
plan.
Yes, that is a change to the forward plan.
Okay. Yeah, but does the tariff need to be on there somewhere? If the trade do come forward. It may, I mean, if the trade don't come forward, then it falls by the wayside, but do we need to plan for it?
Chairman, Councillor Bridgman's correct. If we do get a submission from the trade, then we will bring something back, having done an informal consultation with them as well, to the 20th of March meeting.
Well, is there going to need to be another meeting?
No. What? Not unless members want another one, but I don't see the need for one. If we just do the informal consultation with the trade and then come back to this committee at the March meeting.
So we might not have a March meeting then, now.
Sorry, Councillor Linden, did you say?
Yes, we might not have to go to this 23rd or whatever date it is in March.
I suspect very strongly that by the end of this week we'll have something in our inbox from the trade.
That one.
Okay.
There may be another one later in the year, perhaps. Hopefully not. Councillor Linden.
So the to be confirmed, we will know about on the 2nd March meeting, because obviously we didn't do the timetable at the last Christmas meeting. Is that correct? So we'll know the dates soon we get re-elected. At our 16th of March meeting for the diary for next year. We normally discuss it at Christmas, our Christmas meeting.
Chairman, as soon as those dates are agreed, then we will put them onto the planner, and Stephen may have more of an update on that than that. But the meetings tend to follow a reasonably similar pattern each year, so they take place roughly at the same time.
Can we ask for advice from Stephen?
Yes, so yeah, you correct. So it would have been, generally speaking, December is when the timetable comes through. Didn't on this occasion, but the 16th of March counts as when next year's dates will be set for next year's municipal year.
Thank you, because I really missed that item as I mentioned to the service director. So, well, thank you. I look forward to that every year.
Excellent. In that case, if we have no other comments, I move on business for today.
And I'm going to have my
Just on the
and I'll get my pre-meeting.
The live stream's ended.
But they did. No.